Welcome to The Nation. I'm Rachel Smalley. This week the government released its first ever report card into how our 16 regions are doing. Auckland, Taranaki and Waikato got top marks, but Northland, Gisborne and the Eastern Bay of Plenty scored low. Economic Development Minister Steven Joyce says there are opportunities for those regions, but that means embracing those opportunities that some find unpopular, like mining, oil exploration and intensive farming. The Minister joins me now. Good morning, Mr Joyce. Thank you for coming in this morning.
No worries.
So some regions in New Zealand are fortunate in terms of resources, and you've singled out Waikato and Taranaki, but regions like Northland, they have a much tougher time of it, don't they?
That's right, and some of the things they can control and some of the things that they can't control. But actually the Taranaki one is quite instructive because they have effectively 3 or 4 industries that are going very well for them, and there's nothing like a bit of critical mass to drive your business. If Taranaki was just the dairy sector, it would be another struggling region, even though it's an important dairy sector part of the country. But it's got oil and gas, has had that for a significant period of time.
But that's the reality, isn't it? Where you've got natural resources like oil and gas, then those are the regions that have developed economically quite well.
And to take as an example, there are actually 8 similar basins around New Zealand to the Taranaki basin. Some of them are more difficult, some of them are easier. And we don't know yet, any of us, exactly which ones could produce in a similar way to Taranaki. But what is a struggle is that some regions, because of the discussion and the way it flows in a region, basically don't even want to look. And that's a bit exasperating because many of the same people in the same regions would say we need more jobs for our people, but they just don't want to explore the opportunities.
OK, and in your report you suggest as much as this, and you say that there are natural resources available to the far north and to the east coast. What has the east coast got, in your opinion?
A whole lot of things going for it. It's a very good food producing area. It has some strength in wine and food and beverage. But if you look at what else it needs, because that's not enough to keep it growing. I mean, basically the report points out that it's going to be in a sort of declining employment situation unless new industries are developed. So the sort of things it does need to look at is the oil and gas, which we've talked about, but it also needs to look at, we need to get the Maori economic base developed. And there's a lot of work going on there with Minister Finlayson, not just with the treaty settlements, but also in terms of the review of the Maori Trustee Act around how land is used. And there's some excellent people doing a lot of work up there. But it's all about, you've got to look at all your options and create a little bit more urgency. So the message of this report is not that it's oil and gas or anything else in particular. It is basically saying to regions, don't be afraid of looking at all your options because things can be well run. We see that in regions around the country. Don't just listen to a small minority. Actually get out there and explore your opportunities.
Well, one of the areas that perhaps is requiring further exploration, according to this report, is oil on the East Coast.
Yes, right.
But categorically, we can't say that there is oil in the East Coast basin.
Well, of course you can't, but you've got plenty of people willing to look and invest the money. And in my book, if there's people who are prepared to invest their own money to do things, then there's probably an indication that there might be something in it.
So Petrobras had a look, and I quote from their report, they said not sufficient to justify further exploration. The signs of oil and gas were not sufficient.
But again, that's a little bit the speciousness of some of the argument, because it's just because one player decides or doesn't decide to do something. If we hang it, but if we hang it on one company, so we've got lots of companies that are willing to have an investment in New Zealand in terms of exploration for oil and gas. You've got the Anadakos and the Tags and Apaches and all that sort of stuff. So those people are right into that. So the people that oppose the stuff say, aha, there you go, Petrobras said we couldn't do it in our little patch, so that's it. The whole thing.
I guess I would say, well, what does the government know that Petrobras doesn't? Because if there's oil there, then that's a big company. It had its permit.
No, but don't look at us. Look at the investors. You've got a company drilling exploration holes in the back of Dannyvirk right now, and they believe they're putting a very significant investment there. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars being invested around New Zealand in the upcoming summer by different exploration firms to see what the opportunities are. So don't listen to us, listen to those people. But the point is, you actually do need to explore. Like all these industries, you do need to go and have a look. And and it's not even about putting your own money up. It's literally saying, we're happy for these companies to come in and do some investigation.
But then what if it's not worth it?
You're
putting a lot of emphasis here on something that might be there.
No, actually, you're putting the emphasis on it with respect.
Well, in your report it says there are a number of options that might lead to some petroleum development.
Okay,
that's a loose word.
But let's go through it. Our report actually goes through a huge number of things in the government's business growth agenda that we're working on in all of those regions. So you've got to look at a range of things. You're absolutely right. There is no single thing that will change the outcome for these regions. It has to be a range of things. So it's about the infrastructure. It's about the ultra-fast broadband and the rural broadband. It's about the roading situation, particularly in Northland, that link to Auckland, which is the biggest population just down the road, crucially important for that region, particularly the southern half of that region, to take advantage of. You talk about the skills. That's very important. So we're doing a lot of work making sure that the polytechnics are much more clued into the skill needs of their regions. It's about innovation, primary growth partnership at all of those agricultural regions is very important. So to sort of just focus on oil and gas, it's just one part of it.
And you've also talked about the RMA, and you've talked about that on this program, and you said the regions need to be more welcoming to mineral and oil exploration. So you said
only if you want the jobs. If you don't want the jobs, don't worry about it.
You said changes were going to be made to the RMA.
They are being made.
When is that legislation going to be passed then?
Well, we've got one set of legislation that Amy Adams has got in the House right now, and then she's got a discussion document out for the next set that's following on behind that. So and we've also done two changes already in terms of the national consenting process and the speeded up consenting process.
So when will it be law?
Well, it's all working through. Some of it's law now, some of it will be law in a very short space of time, and some of it will be law after that. But the point of this report is to make the point that actually it's not just about making laws. A lot of New Zealand's regional economic growth is determined by the actions of people in those regions. And so it's worth having the discussion about what you're prepared to do to have the jobs in your region versus the jobs in Western Australia or the jobs in Queensland or the jobs in Singapore.
All right, let's assume that the RMA, tomorrow it's all law. It's changed, it's done, you've freed everything up. How long until we see accelerated growth in a region like Northland?
But the point is you don't just free everything up. All we're doing is speeding up the decision-making processes. The local people do have to have a say in what actually happens in their regions.
But let's just assume that that's happened, and they have had that say, and it's all done, and it's good, and everyone's happy, and the changes are made. How long until we see that accelerated growth in Northland or, you know, Wanganui?
Well, let's come back to Northland for a second. I mean, we've got to change the whole conversation in Northland to be about jobs and growth, and the mayors up there are actually into that. But this is a 5 to 10 year plan. Taranaki did not happen overnight. So in terms of Northland, there's 2 or 3 key things that we've got to do. Firstly, we've got to get those treaty settlements sorted out. We've got to get the iwi into a productive base because they're a big part of the story in Northland. Secondly, we've got to explore, and I note your point about exploration is not production, we've got to explore the opportunities for oil and gas and minerals in the north. Thirdly, we've got to get the infrastructure right. So the road between Auckland and Northland is in some sort of shape that actually people can run businesses in Northland and be confident about getting their stuff to market. And fourthly, we need to get the skill base sorted because there's lots of young unemployed, particularly young Maori, that we need to get sorted through skills training to make sure that they can get jobs.
That's what this report does highlight. The areas you're talking about, Northland, the East Coast, Wanganui, there are high populations of Maori there. Is this the clearest signal ever that we have of the link between poverty and Maori in this country?
Well, I think there's definitely a link in terms of the opportunities for particularly rural Maori in the areas that you talk about. There's no doubt about that. And so that's why it's really important to look at the natural resources opportunities, to get the resource base sorted for the local iwi, because if you look at some other parts of the country where there's been settlements in place for a long time, and I think of the Tainuis and the Ngaitahus, who now have a strong economic base, they're employing their people, they're upskilling their people. That's an important part of the story. And then there's a story about just growing the skills in that region, but it doesn't actually solve the region's economic problems if it's about growing the skills and the kids move off.
And I think we can probably put aside, to some degree, some of those treaty settlements as well, and look at the issue well, I don't think that's an issue for young people coming. Sure, they are. I'm not saying they're not important, but look, I don't think the implication here is that this government has failed Maori, but successive governments have failed Maori, and in regions such as Northland, no government has managed to build a bridge between education and employment.
But the trick is you've got to look and take up the opportunities. So let's look at some of the leadership up there. Our dear friend Hone Harawira, who's out there saying, we don't want any of your oil and gas, we don't want any of your exploration.
He's just trying to feed kids with the poverty issue up there. That's what he says.
Yeah, but he's not interested in the economic growth that creates that opportunity to do that.
But it's not all oil and gas, surely. I mean, that's a fossil fuel. The world's telling us to move away from that.
But let's look at the things that he is opposing. And you've got to look at all your opportunities. You can't just sit there and say, right, we won't do this, we won't do this, we won't do that, and we don't do that because we're not into any of that. There's just this one thing over here that we're interested in. That is not the way to build any sort of an economy. And nobody in the world does it that way successfully, is to go out there and say, we're going to take off the table 80% of our opportunities in a range of things, and it's not just minerals and oil and gas, and then turn around and say, this bit over here is the bit that's really important. We're just going to get the skills sorted and magically it will all sort out.
That just doesn't work. I'll come back again to that bridge, between education and employment? Because whatever you do, you finish up at Kaitaia High School.
Yep.
What do you do then?
Well, it's a very fair question. And if let's just compare that with the Kaitaia opportunity, because there are limited opportunities. There are some areas there, look, there's some good businesses there, but obviously not enough to actually employ all the young people up there. And then you look at the option in Taranaki and you say, well, what's going on there? Well, it's engineering services is a very good part. Why is there engineering services there? Because there's a strong dairy industry and a strong oil and gas industry. Then there's a petrochemical industry there. Why is that there? Because there is a strong oil and gas industry.
So what is there in Northland?
Well, Northland, you've got the same sorts of things. You've got a primary sector resource base in land, which is underutilised, and that's partially because we've had issues in terms of the way we're able to, for example, invest and borrow in Maori land that needs to be sorted out with the Maori Lands Act. We've got the issue that a number of tribes are yet to settle in terms of their economic base.
It's also fickle in terms of resources because the Far North doesn't have the rain that Waikato and Taranaki has,
well, actually, no, I'm sorry, the Far North has a lot of the rain. The Far North is pretty wet. I've been up there a fair bit. At times of the year, it can be very wet indeed. In fact, some of the issues up there is the floods they get from time to time because of the very high levels of rainfall. So no, that's not the issue. There's some very good farming up there. And there can be more farming up there. There can be more tourism. There can be more people living up there and working in Auckland once we get a decent road. But is it not the government's role to build that bridge between education and employment? Well, otherwise, what do they do? Everybody has to leave town if they're going to study. But I absolutely agree with you.
Have you spoken with the mayors in these regions?
I need to answer your question because I think it's really important. You said it's the government's role to build that bridge.
Is it the government's role?
Well, my view is it's the government's role to provide the necessary infrastructure. So that's why we're investing a whole lot of broadband infrastructure and roading infrastructure in Northland.
Roads in the net, a good long term, aren't they?
Well, that's the infrastructure. I mean, with the greatest respect, that's what they need up there. That's the bit they're short of. Then you go into the issue of skills, and that's very important as well. And then you go into
the mayors and the councils in these regions, in Gisborne and in the Far North, and say, what do you need? How can we help you?
Absolutely. Not in terms of the preparation of this report, but I have been to nearly every region in the country over the last 15 months. And for those that I haven't been in the last 15 months, I have been previously. I've had economic roundtables in every region. I had one yesterday in Blenheim. Sat down, we had the Mayor, the Chamber of Commerce, a whole lot of businesses. We sit in a room for an hour and a half, work through all the issues in that region. I have some that I bring to the table, they have some they bring to the table. We discuss them, and that gives me a very good picture, which I take back to my colleagues as we work on the business growth agenda. And as I say, I've done about 15, 16, 18 of those over the last year and a half.
And when you look at regional economic growth, how does selling state assets create economic growth and create jobs? Oh,
hugely important. With the greatest respect, you've drunk the Kool-Aid. We're not selling them. We're actually listing a minority shareholding of them. But that's an important
49%. You're still selling off state assets.
But that's an important part of the story. Because actually New Zealand's capital markets are hugely important for investment in the region. No, but listen,
where do the jobs come from?
Rachel, listen to me for a second. Because this is really important. Because if you look at some of the jobs in Northland, they're international investors that are in the New Zealand market and they're New Zealand companies that are listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. So why are they there? And they see a regulatory environment where they can invest and actually get a return on their investment. So that's very important.
It's part of the development, isn't it? It's part of the economic development, international capital coming in.
That's definitely part of it. Sure. And so you look at the Winston Peters of the world complaining about the investment by Harvard in New Zealand, and you say, which planet are you on, Winston, if you're interested in jobs in this country? And the other part of it is the whole point of the mixed ownership model, as well as giving the government some much needed funding to invest in other things, is to actually help build New Zealand's capital markets. Because it's important that in New Zealand companies feel they can list on the stock exchange, raise some money and get a fair valuation for the work that they do. This is very important. And so
that
means,
questions.
No, but you asked the questions, so I'll give you the answer. It's very important that we actually encourage the growth of our capital markets if we are to get growth in the regions like Wanganui, Gisborne or Northland.
And are you happy with the take-up so far? Is the government happy with the take-up of Mighty River Power shares?
You know and I know that I'm not allowed to comment on that until after the
board
build next week.
I didn't know that. I honestly didn't know that.
No, there you go.
Is the share price likely to be closer to 230 or 280?
I have no idea, and nor could I be. I'm not legally able to offer any comment even if I did have any idea.
Do you think Labor and the Greens and their electricity policy, did it hit the mark, do you think?
No, it's nuts.
Did it
With the greatest
did it sort of put a little bit of knife in the side of the asset sales, though?
Well, we'll worry about that next week. But the trouble with that policy, the reality is it's negative for investment, negative for savings, negative for jobs, negative for growth, and on the other hand, it won't work, and apart from that, it's excellent. OK, I want to talk to you a little bit about Auckland, because when you read through the Regional Economic Activity Report, it's the powerhouse, third of the country's population, third of the country's growth, and it's a great city, provided you stay in the same place. No, that's not correct at all.
It is. Come on, you can't get around the city.
No, that's
How can
not.
you have a fast-moving, slick economy if everybody's sitting in gridlock?
Well, that would be a problem, I agree. But actually, and as a former Minister of Transport, I know these things, you go and look at the congestion statistics for Auckland in the last 3 years, and you will see that they have steadily improved.
Anybody who's driving around Auckland will tell you that's not the case.
I agree with you. Once you're in a traffic jam, then of course everything's bad. But if you look at the development of the Southwestern Motorway, the Victoria Park Tunnel, which we've built, the Central Motorway Junction, which was partly done by the previous government, partly done by this government, has actually seen very big improvements. And somebody who lives on the shore, well, right up the other end of the shore, actually, I do know what it's like to get to and from the city. And although it's never perfect, because you're always going to strike problems, it's actually considerably better. But the big opportunity actually next is the bit that is really the most expensive project that we've ever done, is that link between the Southwestern and Northwestern Motorway, which is being built at the moment in Waterview. That will have, by all accounts, a very significant impact on the traffic congestion on the southern and northern motorways and the northwestern, and that will probably get Auckland. The government has been
significantly critical. You know, the hands of central government are fairly much, you know, tinkering in Auckland a lot. Why is that? You tell me why that is.
Well, fundamentally because taxpayers are the people that are paying the bill. So we represent all New Zealand taxpayers. Now, if Auckland Council, but if Auckland Council said we wanted to do this over there and we're paying that out of our rates, so we'd say go for your life, knock yourselves out. But generally, that's not the approach. The approach is taxpayers, you should pay some more, and you should get the government to pay through.
Even the Otago Daily Times this week said, you know, and who would have thought the issue here in terms of Auckland is that that city has to work for everybody in the country to be rich. So we need to maybe look at Auckland's transport problems, and if that means taxpayer money, so be it.
But with the greatest respect, you're acting as if we don't. We are spending more on Auckland Transport than has ever been spent in real terms ever in the city by a considerable margin. So we're building Waterview, $2 billion in terms, including the extension of the Northwestern Motorway. We're spending $1.6 billion in improving the railway network in Auckland, the new trains, the electrification, the double tracking out to the north, right out west. Yes. All that's been done. And the question is not about those things, because they are generally agreed by all the transport statisticians that that'll get us through to about 2021. And those are the projects that are being built right now. And then following that, there's a question of what happens next. And there's some debate about which projects will achieve a decent outcome for Auckland, because we can all agree they'll cost a lot of money.
All right, Steven Joyce, Minister of Economic Development, appreciate your time. We will come back to you a little later in the programme.